Good afternoon. This is Paul Harris for Kitco News at the BMO Global Mining and Metals Conference. I'm joined this afternoon with George Salamis, the President and CEO of Integra Resources.
Good afternoon, great to see you again.
Good afternoon, George. Welcome to the show. The gold price has got some wind beneath its wings, and a lot of miners are benefiting from that in the precious metal space. How do you see that translating to the junior space, junior explorers?
Well, I mean, directly as a company, Integra Resources, we're experiencing that. We're seeing a lot more trading liquidity in our stock, certainly in the last 6 months. The last financing that we did had a really broad and strong distribution to it. We saw some funds come into our stock that we haven't seen before, some bigger institutions. And so we're starting to see that sort of momentum come into our sector. But I should sort of put that as a caveat, not all juniors are seeing that.
Well, I think you're right. I think there's a bifurcation. Well-recognized names such as yourself, such as the Ross Beatties, the Lucas Lundins, they're able to, I guess, mobilize investors behind them, but not all juniors have that possibility.
I think what that's being driven by is more than any other time. I think investors are starting to look at betting on the jockey and the teams as opposed to the asset being top of the list and teams being next. What I'm seeing is a lot of money coming into well-established teams with track records, histories of delivery, delivering on what they said that they would deliver on, and that's always the first wave.
You've been very successful raising money for Integra Resources. You've been able to fund your work programs. You said you're bringing in new investors. Is the level of detail you have to go into to convince investors? Are they asking deeper questions? Do they really want to, check under the hood and make sure everything works?
Oh, wow, absolutely. I mean, when I first got into the junior mining space in 2000s, one meeting was good enough to convince somebody to invest in your company. Now you get put through so much rigorous due diligence and follow-up questions, and it's all good. That's what had to happen to our sector. But yeah, a lot more rigorous due diligence happens now, for sure.
One of the key themes I'm hearing from this conference is miners talking about the increasing and critical importance of ESG aspects. Is that becoming more of a component in the meetings you're having? Investors wanting to know what you as a junior are doing on these kind of aspects?
Yes. As a junior miner, we haven't had to deal with the focus on ESG yet, but we're hearing these rumblings in the distance that, hey, we have to start preparing ourselves for that coming. We do those types of initiatives at Integra. We did it at Integra Gold. We're doing it now in Idaho as a matter of routine. That's what we do. We engage with the local stakeholders very early on because that works very well. But we have yet to see a set of guidelines from the investment community for the likes of us juniors that say we need to see these 5 things on the ESG front for you as a junior miner. And I hope that comes.
I suppose the junior space has had that in the past in terms of potential funding from the IFC because their requirements for financing on things such as government relations, community relations, etc. are very stringent. But I guess it would be very helpful to have a greater orientation, maybe from sort of PDAC or ICMM or someone of that nature.
Yes. Yeah. No. I'm sure it's a business for somebody to tell us juniors, what we need to do. And the things that we as a company do aren't that expensive. It's not. We're not talking a huge amount of cost for some of these initiatives. Holding stakeholder meetings and forums, donating small amounts of money to local communities that can go a long way, creating sustainable initiatives, where we're looking at one now in Jordan Valley. They're not expensive.
I mean, is that going to be the secret to attracting millennials, the younger generation, to the mining space, both in terms of the human talent and investors, showing that mining can do more than just dig holes in the ground?
Oh, absolutely. That's key, right? I mean, everybody wants to capture that key millennial group that has a lot of money to invest, but all of a sudden, that group needs to see some form of attention to social responsibility. And I think what you just mentioned is key. Not only do the millennials want to make money, but they want us to be socially responsible in what we do, and we'll have to do both. I mean, we will have to bring in these ESG initiatives into what we do.
Okay, well, let's change tack slightly. Let's talk about Delamar and the projects in Idaho. You've been successful in bringing the projects on quite a fair clip over the last couple of years. Well, what are the sort of main plans for this year, and where do you want to get to?
Yeah, so this year it's going to be sort of an equal measure of exploration and of what we call development level studies, basically supporting eventual pre-feasibility next year. But we realize, having done this before, what happens when a company essentially announces itself as being, here's the feasibility study, we're now in development mode. Typically what happens then is the focus on exploration and the dollars go to zero. And everybody stops exploring while you're focused on building a mining operation. So in our view, we've got 2 to 3 years to keep our foot on the gas of exploration, build the resource base up. We believe that kind of the next stop for us is 6 million ounces. We're at 4.5 now, roughly speaking. And while we do that, de-risk the project with these feasibility level studies.
When you get to this stage, how important will it be to go from a feasibility into a mine build decision in a relatively short space of time, to not have that sort of slack period, if you like?
That slack period, yes, the dreaded slack period, or that part of the Lassonde curve that they call, right? Again, I think it's, in order to avoid that pitfall of that curve, you still need to be able to point to some measurable upside on a project, and it's only exploration that's going to do that. So I think you still have to keep some exploration going even as you're developing to show growth. In terms of the timeline for us to a development decision, a lot of that's dictated by permitting, obviously, and we're calling something in the order of 40 months to get to that point, and we've got a lot of exploration ahead of us to do to get there, but we'll get there.
Okay, and you're in Idaho, in the United States. There's been a renaissance in exploration and interest in developing gold projects in Idaho. And obviously President Trump is very keen for natural resource development in the United States.
Yes.
To what extent do you think that will facilitate the permitting process and perhaps even make it a shorter time frame?
Well, we certainly hope that is the case. I mean, what we hear from other companies dealing on issues of permitting in the Western U.S., the response times from all of those branches of government that report to the EPA seem to be a lot shorter than they were previously. If you know, previously, if a company submitted a document for review, there was no set time frame for a response. It could be a year, it could be 3 years. Now, under the new directives by President Trump, I think they have within a year to respond, which is great. So at least you're dealing with a measurable time frame. We're not quite there yet. We've got a lot of work to do, but we hope that set of directives will be in place when we get there.
And I understand this morning the new Fraser Institute survey, Idaho's really risen dramatically in the rankings in terms of attractiveness jurisdictions.
Yes, 14th spot to 8th spot.
Wow.
Worldwide. So they have two columns. Here's the top 10 best, and here are the top 10 worst. And Idaho, for the first time, is in the top 10 best. And that's not a surprise to us, right? Dealing in Idaho has been a dream for us. The state is so supportive. The government's so supportive. They market with us when we're out talking to investors. The various government bureaus that we deal with in terms of permitting our exploration, super cooperative on that end. So no surprise to us, but it's good news to the rest of the investing public. Yeah.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much for taking the time to meet with us this morning, George. And thank you for watching. Stay tuned to kitco.com for more from the BMO Global Metals and Mining Conference.